Don't you understand English, or are you just pretending not to hand it over, and this'll all be over nice and easy? If not, you're going to the station." Officer Frank Kowalski's voice was harsh, laced with threat and impatience. His coarse hand jabbed towards the jet-black crocodile leather Chanel clutch the elegant black woman clutched tightly. The woman, around 50, tall and slender, wore a perfectly tailored black suit that radiated an aura of quiet power and sophistication. She subtly furrowed her delicate brows. "I don't understand what you mean. I have fully complied with all airport security regulations." Her voice was deep, warm, and surprisingly calm. Officer Gary O'Malley, Kowalski's younger partner with close-cropped blonde hair and a perpetual cunning smirk, chimed in from the side, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Sometimes the rules around here need to be a little flexible for things to move along faster, ma'am, especially for your people, who don't seem used to the rules here." He winked suggestively, his greedy gaze undisguised, as he glanced at the expensive jewelry the woman wore. Before the woman could react, cold, gleaming metal handcuffs snapped onto one of her slender wrists, fastened swiftly and roughly by Kowalski. For failure to cooperate and obstructing an officer in the performance of his duties, Kowalski declared triumphantly as if he'd just achieved a great victory. Was this a blatant shakedown extortion steeped in discrimination, or just a terrible misunderstanding, an unfortunate mistake? Why would a woman of such polite, sophisticated appearance who seemed to be a law-abiding citizen be treated so brutally and unjustly at a major international airport, a place considered the face of the nation? And did these two corrupt, greedy officers have the faintest clue who they had just handcuffed? A woman who with a single phone call could change their lives forever, in ways they could never imagine. The unjustly treated black woman was Isabella "Izzy" Vance, 52 years old. She was a renowned and incredibly successful interior designer, with her own prestigious firm catering to the elite and numerous high-profile projects around the world. However, what few people knew, and what she diligently kept private to maintain as normal a life as possible, was that she was the wife of Theodore "Theo" Vance, the current director of the Central Intelligence Agency CIA, one of the most powerful and enigmatic men in the world. Though her life was intrinsically linked to a husband privy to critical national secrets, Isabella always strove to maintain her professional independence and a private space for herself and her family, away from media scrutiny and the complexities of the political world. The reason Isabella Vance was at Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C. that morning was that she was en route to Milan, Italy. She was to attend one of the year's most important and prestigious international interior design exhibitions, an event she had planned to attend for months. This trip was not merely for work. It was also an opportunity to find new inspiration, meet colleagues, and enjoy a rare moment of respite after a series of demanding projects. She had decided to travel alone on this trip without any security detail or assistance, as was her custom on personal, unofficial journeys, to avoid unnecessary attention and to experience things as normally as possible. Izzy Vance's demeanor always exuded elegance, confidence, and a profound understanding. She was well accustomed to air travel and the complex procedures at international airports. She never flaunted her wealth or her husband's position, nor did she ever act haughty or demand special privileges. She simply wanted things to proceed smoothly, quickly, and by the book. That day, she wore a classic, timeless Chanel suit in jet black paired with a dark brown crocodile Hermes Birkin bag. Luxury items that clearly signaled her status and refined taste, yet were not ostentatious or deliberately attention-seeking. The values Isabella Vance cherished and pursued in life, which she often discussed and shared with her powerful husband, were fairness, integrity, absolute respect for the law, and human dignity. She abhorred the abuse of power, corruption, and any act of injustice, no matter how small. Perhaps this was why her reaction to the officer's shakedown was all the more resolute. The two airport police officers confronting Isabella Vance were Officer Frank Kowalski and Officer Gary O'Malley. Kowalski, about 45, white with a growing beer belly, a somewhat thuggish face, and shifty, cunning eyes, had worked in Dulles Airport's security checkpoint division for nearly 10 years. O'Malley, around 38, also white with slicked back blonde hair, often wore a smug smirk and always presented himself as a wise guy who knew how to work the system. Both were currently assigned to the security checkpoint at Dulles International Airport, a position they considered lucrative. Their official annual salaries were only around $70,000 to $75,000, not nearly enough to support their somewhat extravagant lifestyles and their gambling and drinking habits. Within the airport security force, Kowalski and O'Malley were a notorious pair, an unholy alliance that specialized in shaking down passengers, especially those who looked wealthy foreigners who weren't fluent in English or members of minority groups they deemed easy targets, unlikely to make a fuss or afraid of trouble. They frequently deliberately created difficulties during processing, looking for petty, insignificant errors in passengers' documents or luggage, and then subtly suggesting a tip or gratuity to make things go smoothly and quickly. Their primary motive was nothing but insatiable greed, a desire to earn ill-gotten gains to satisfy their personal desires. They believed that with their police uniforms and a little power, no one would dare openly defy them, especially in a sensitive place like an airport. They had gotten away with similar schemes many times in the past, and the money earned from those dirty dealings was not insignificant. The reason Kowalski and O'Malley targeted Isabella Vance that day was no different from their usual calculations. Seeing Izzy, a black woman traveling alone, dressed elegantly in expensive designer items, the Hermes Birkin bag, and the Cartier watch on her wrist, did not escape their predatory eyes. They immediately thought she was a juicy mark, someone from whom they could easily squeeze a considerable sum of money without significant resistance. Deep-seated racial prejudices made them blindly confident that Isabella would be scared, wouldn't dare cause a scene, and would quickly accept their rules of the game. Isabella Vance had correctly and fully completed all required security procedures. She had patiently waited in line, presented her diplomatic passport, though she preferred not to use this privilege on personal trips. It was the only passport she carried, and her first-class ticket to the check-in agent. She had also placed her handbag and coat on the conveyor belt for the security scanner. There was nothing unusual or suspicious about her luggage or documents. However, Officer Kowalski deliberately held onto Isabella's red diplomatic passport, flipping through it, scrutinizing it unnecessarily and critically. "Your passport looks a bit old, doesn't it?" he said, his tone deliberately grave. "And the picture in here doesn't look much like you in person. We'll need to check this more thoroughly." It was clearly a flimsy excuse, a familiar tactic to begin their extortion charade. While Kowalski was inspecting the passport officer, O'Malley moved closer to Isabella, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, but actually so that those nearby couldn't easily overhear. "Ma'am," he said, his voice sickeningly sweet, "if you want everything to be resolved quickly and smoothly, so you don't miss your important flight to Milan, perhaps a small token of appreciation for us guys working hard here would go a long way." He glanced quickly at the Chanel clutch Isabella was holding, his eyes glinting with obvious desire. Isabella Vance looked O'Malley straight in the eye, then glanced at Kowalski, who was still pretending to be engrossed in the passport. She firmly and unhesitatingly refused. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I've done nothing wrong, and I have no reason to appreciate anyone. Please finish your check and return my passport immediately." Her voice, still remarkably calm, now carried an added steeliness and an undeniable air of authority. Isabella's firm and unyielding attitude slightly surprised the two greedy officers and began to anger them. They hadn't expected a black woman, even a seemingly wealthy one, to be so stubborn and to reject their offer so bluntly. In previous cases, most of their marks had been frightened and quick to back down. Officer Kowalski, having been rebuffed, growled, his expression turning more aggressive. "You're being uncooperative with us, ma'am. Do you realize we have every right to detain you here for further investigation for as long as it takes until we're satisfied your flight won't wait for you?" Officer O'Malley quickly added, his voice menacing. "This attitude of yours, ma'am, constitutes obstructing an officer in the performance of his duties. We can arrest you right here for that, and you'll face much bigger legal trouble." Isabella Vance maintained an admirable composure. She knew she had done nothing wrong, and she would never bow to such abuse of power and corruption. "You have no legitimate reason to arrest me. I demand to speak to your direct supervisor immediately to clarify this matter." "A supervisor? You'll have plenty of chances to meet them later when you're at the airport police station," Officer Kowalski said in a challenging tone, then discreetly signaled O'Malley. Instantly, Officer O'Malley pulled a pair of shiny metal handcuffs from the holster on his hip and approached Isabella Vance with a menacing expression. A few passengers queuing in the nearby security area began to notice the commotion, and murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Mr. David Chen, an elegantly dressed Asian businessman in his 60s, standing directly behind Isabella in line, had witnessed the entire incident from the beginning. His face clearly showed his disapproval and discomfort at the officer's behavior. Officer O'Malley, without any warning, swiftly wrenched one of Isabella Vance's arms behind her back and roughly snapped the handcuffs onto her wrist, despite her strong protests and demands to stop. "Let's go talk where it's easier. Too many people out here," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Isabella Vance, though feeling pain and immense outrage at this brutal act, didn't scream or resist violently. She knew doing so would only worsen the situation and could give them an excuse to use more force. But her gaze, fixed on the two officers, was filled with contempt, anger, and unshakable resolve. She wouldn't let this end easily. Mr. David Chen, the Asian businessman, could no longer remain silent. He boldly spoke up. "Officers, I'm a witness. I've been standing here and saw everything. I saw that she did absolutely nothing wrong. You are treating her outrageously and unfairly." Officer Kowalski immediately glared at Mr. Chen, his voice threatening, "You shut up, this isn't your business, or do you want to have a private chat with us too?" Mr. David. Chen, though deeply indignant faced with the officer's aggressive demeanor, reluctantly fell silent for the moment. However, he quickly and discreetly took out his cell phone, turned on the video recorder, and began to film the ensuing events. Isabella Vance was escorted by the two officers through the crowd of curious, bewildered passengers. A wave of humiliation, anger, and a touch of anxiety washed over her, but she still managed to keep her back straight, walking with an undiminished pride. In a small, cramped, musty-smelling security room in a secluded corner of the airport, Officer Kowalski and Officer O'Malley continued their charade of pressure and intimidation against Isabella Vance. They demanded she honestly confess her suspicious activities, though they couldn't point to any specific actions. They again hinted that if she played ball and was a little flexible, everything could be resolved smoothly and quickly, and she could still make her flight to Milan. Isabella Vance firmly demanded her right to make a phone call to her lawyer or a family member. The two officers scoffed derisively. "Around here we are the law," Officer Kowalski said smugly. "You have no right to demand anything." Isabella looked directly at their faces, contorted by greed and stupidity. "You will deeply regret your foolish actions today. I'm giving you one last chance. Remove these handcuffs, return my passport, and apologize sincerely. If not, the consequences will be far beyond your imagination." Isabella Vance's unwavering resolve, her complete lack of fear, and her veiled warning caused Kowalski and O'Malley a flicker of unease, a moment's hesitation. They had never encountered a mark who reacted so strongly and calmly. However, their insatiable greed and inherent stupidity quickly overrode any remaining sense. They stubbornly believed they held all the cards, that this woman was just putting on a brave face to intimidate them. After a fruitless period of bickering and argument, seizing a moment when Officer Kowalski was distracted by someone's phone call, Isabella Vance, with a deft move born of special training, something few knew about her past before marrying the CIA director, retrieved her cell phone from her handbag. The phone the foolish officers hadn't yet confiscated, too busy negotiating and threatening. Without any rush, she calmly unlocked her screen and dialed the single number saved as a priority contact, a number she knew could resolve any problem. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Who gave you permission to make a call?" Officer Kowalski yelled angrily when he noticed Isabella's action, lunging to snatch the phone. Isabella Vance put the phone to her ear, her voice remaining uncannily calm, almost devoid of emotion. "Theo, darling, I'm at Dulles International Airport security room in Concourse C near Gate 12. There's a small unnecessary bit of trouble with 2 police officers here. Could you call someone in charge at airport security to clarify a few things?" On the other end of the line, a deep, authoritative male voice, devoid of surprise, came through, though the volume was low. It was still loud enough for Kowalski and O'Malley, standing very close, to vaguely overhear. "Izzy, darling, are you okay? What kind of trouble? Don't worry. Put one of them on the phone with me." Isabella Vance smiled faintly, a smile devoid of any amusement, then slowly handed the connected phone to Officer Kowalski, who stood frozen, mouth agape in astonishment. "My husband would like a word with you, officer." Officer Kowalski hesitantly, tremblingly reached for the phone, then slowly pressed it to his ear. Hello, who is this?" Officer Kowalski only managed to hear a few brief, cold sentences from the other end, but his face instantly drained of color, shifting from angry red to deathly pale, then a ghastly gray of fear. His hand holding the phone trembled so violently he could barely keep his grip. He could only stammer into the phone, yes, sir, I understand. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." Trembling, he hung up, then looked at Isabella Vance with a look of utter terror, as if he'd just seen a ghost in broad daylight. Who are you?" Isabella Vance smiled gently, a knowing, almost pitying smile. "I am Isabella Vance, and the man you just spoke to is my husband, Theodore Vance, the current director of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. You've just handcuffed, illegally detained, and blatantly solicited a bribe from the wife of this country's Director of Central Intelligence Officers." Officer O'Malley, who had until then maintained an air of cocky confidence, felt his legs give way upon hearing those words, his face ashen. He staggered and collapsed onto a nearby chair mouth, agape, unable to speak, his whole body shaking like a leaf. Almost instantaneously, mere moments after the phone call ended, the security room door burst open. Captain Eva Rostova, the Dulles Airport Security Shift Commander, a stern-faced professional woman of Eastern European descent in her 40s, along with several other senior officers from the department, rushed inside. Captain Rostova's face was a mask of extreme tension, alarm, and a hint of anger. She and her colleagues had just received a call from very, very high up, a call none of them dared to disobey. The brief but powerful phone call from CIA Director Theodore Vance hadn't just been to ascertain his wife's condition. He had issued clear and decisive orders to Captain Eva Rostova report immediately to the Concourse C security room, ensure Mrs. Isabella Vance's absolute safety, and immediately detain Officers Frank Kowalski and Gary O'Malley for a full investigation into the entire incident. He also unofficially informed her that a special investigative team from the Office of the Inspector General OIG of the Department of Homeland Security DHS, possibly with the involvement of FBI agents, would be at Dulles Airport within the hour to take over the entire case. This indicated the severity of the matter had far exceeded the airport security's purview. Captain Eva Rostova, after hearing a quick report from Isabella Vance about what had transpired, and seeing the terrified, broken demeanor of her two subordinates Kowalski and O'Malley, immediately understood they had caused a true disaster, a scandal that could shake the entire airport security system. Without hesitation, she ordered the accompanying officers to handcuff Frank Kowalski and Gary O'Malley. "You two," she said, her voice filled with disappointment and anger, "have brought an unforgivable disaster upon yourselves and all of us, faced with the harsh, undeniable truth and the wrath of their direct superior, and from an unseen but immensely powerful entity. They never imagined confronting Frank Kowalski, and Gary O'Malley completely broke down. All their arrogance, bullying, and foolish confidence vanished without a trace. They simultaneously dropped to their knees on the cold floor, weeping pathetically, begging Isabella Vance for forgiveness in a humiliating display. "Mrs. Vance, we truly didn't know. We were wrong. We beg you. Please have mercy, spare us. Give us a way out. We have families, young children at home." Isabella Vance looked at the two men groveling and pleading at her feet with a cold gaze utterly unmoved and without a shred of pity. "When you handcuffed me without cause, when you blatantly solicited a bribe from me, when you treated me like a criminal, did you think of your own families, your children? Did you ever think of your other victims, the more vulnerable people you've mistreated, extorted, and abused in the past?" Her words, though softly spoken, were as sharp as a knife, causing Kowalski and O'Malley to tremble even more with fear and despair. The joint investigative team from the DHS OIG and the FBI arrived swiftly at Dulles Airport, just as the CIA director had indicated. They worked with astonishing speed and professionalism. They gathered detailed testimonies from Isabella Vance, from Captain Eva Rostova, who had shown decisiveness and cooperation, from Mr. David Chen, the courageous Asian businessman who had provided the video footage capturing the officer's entire misconduct, and from several other passenger witnesses. Frank Kowalski's and Gary O'Malley's personnel files and work histories were thoroughly reviewed. Unsurprisingly, investigators found numerous prior complaints and accusations regarding similar negative and extortionate behavior by the two. However, for various reasons, perhaps due to cover-ups by superiors or victims being too intimidated to pursue matters, those complaints had been dismissed or handled superficially, allowing them to become increasingly brazen. The video provided by Mr. David Chen, along with images extracted from the airport's extensive security camera system, became irrefutable, damning evidence of Frank Kowalski's and Gary O'Malley's blatant extortion, abuse of power, and unlawful arrest. The investigation proceeded at lightning speed, with close, top-down oversight, a rarity in typical cases. With such clear and undeniable evidence and pressure from multiple quarters, especially from a leading national intelligence agency whose director's wife had just been insulted and mistreated, Frank Kowalski's and Gary O'Malley's case files were quickly completed and brought before a federal court. In court, they were indicted on a slew of serious charges, including abuse of authority while on duty, soliciting and accepting bribes, unlawful arrest, and severe violations of constitutionally protected civil rights. In the dock, facing irrefutable evidence and the damning testimony of witnesses, Frank Kowalski and Gary O'Malley could offer no reasonable defense for their actions. Isabella Vance's testimony, delivered calmly, objectively, and without personal emotion, carried particular weight, exposing the defendant's greedy, corrupt, and abusive nature. The final outcome of the trial was unsurprising to many. Frank Kowalski and Gary O'Malley were each sentenced to 7 years in prison, a sentence considered severe and fitting for the crimes they had committed. This sentence was not only a punishment for them individually, but also a stern deterrent, a powerful message to others contemplating abusing their power and engaging in wrongdoing. They were also permanently dismissed from the police force and stripped of all related benefits. Frank Kowalski and Gary O'Malley began their long years behind the bars of a federal penitentiary. Their careers, honor families likely to be shattered, and entire futures had vanished into thin air, all because of a moment of greed and unforgivable stupidity. Isabella Vance, though she had missed her important flight to Milan and endured an incredibly unpleasant and unnecessary experience, felt a sense of relief and satisfaction that justice had finally been served decisively. She continued her business trip a few days later, but this incident would undoubtedly leave an indelible mark on her mind, a reminder of the injustices still present in society. CIA Director Theodore Vance, in accordance with protocol, did not directly interfere in the investigation or court proceedings. However, no one could deny that the serious incident involving his wife had undeniably created a powerful undercurrent, ensuring the case was handled fairly rigorously and as swiftly as possible, leaving no room for any cover-up or leniency. Dulles International Airport, after this shameful scandal, was forced to conduct a large-scale review and overhaul of its entire security operations. Several other individuals with similar misconduct to Kowalski and O'Malley were also fired or severely disciplined. Airport management also strengthened internal oversight, organized retraining for all staff on professional ethics, anti-corruption, and anti-discrimination regulations, and the importance of respecting civil rights. Captain Eva Rostova, who had handled the initial situation decisively and professionally, received well-deserved commendation and promotion. This incident, though sensitive details about Isabella Vance's true identity might not have been fully publicized to protect national security interests, still caused a considerable stir among the public. It raised deep concerns about the abuse of power and corruption still prevalent among a segment of law enforcement personnel, those entrusted to uphold the law who instead became its violators. The story of the strong, mysterious black woman who dared to confront corrupt police officers unofficially circulated, becoming an inspiration for many, especially those from marginalized communities. Mr. David Chen, the Asian businessman, received much praise and admiration from the community for bravely speaking out against injustice and providing crucial evidence that helped bring the perpetrators to light. His actions showed that every individual, no matter how small, can contribute to the fight against evil and injustice. Greed and abuse of power will always come at a very steep price, regardless of who the perpetrator is or what position they hold. Never underestimate anyone based on their appearance, skin color, or gender, because you never know who they truly are, what connections they have, or the hidden power they possess. Justice, though it may sometimes be delayed, will never overlook those who do wrong, those who trample on the dignity and rights of others. What do you think about Isabella Vance's actions in this situation? Should she have revealed her special status earlier, to possibly avoid being handcuffed and the unnecessary trouble? Was the 7-year prison sentence for officers Frank Kowalski and Gary O'Malley too harsh or completely deserved for their misconduct and abuse of power? Does this story make you believe more that even the most established and powerful people in society can become victims of injustice? And does that make the fight against corruption, abuse of power, and discrimination more urgent and important than ever?